The lecture hall doors slammed shut with a final, electronic hiss. Professor Sterling's voice cut through the silence. No one leaves. My fingers trembled around the stolen pregnancy test, his leverage, now mine. The fire alarm screamed, but Emily's body hit the desk hard when he shoved her back. The recording was live, synced to the cloud, but one wrong move and we were trapped. Sarah's phone lit up in the front row, her betrayal glowing before she even spoke. The system locked, the exits sealed, and Sterling smiled. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, a sound like a guillotine blade hitting wood. Professor Julian Sterling pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner, and a series of magnetic bolts hissed into place with a definitive, metallic thud. The familiar scent of old parchment and expensive cologne in the room suddenly soured, turning heavy and stagnant. 20 students sat frozen, their pens hovering above notebooks as the digital locks on the doors glowed a defiant neon crimson. The air conditioning hummed a low, mournful tune, but it did nothing to cut the sudden, rising heat in the tiered lecture hall. Chloe Miller gripped the plastic stick inside her hoodie pocket. The jagged edges bit into her palm, a sharp reminder of the risk she had taken that morning. She watched Sterling smooth his silk tie, once, twice, 3 times. The crisp zip of silk on silk echoed in the sudden silence. His movements were methodical, rhythmic, and utterly devoid of warmth. He didn't offer a lecture greeting. He simply stood behind the polished lectern, his eyes scanning the room like a predator measuring the dimensions of a cage. Chloe rose, her chair scraping against the linoleum with a shrill, metallic shriek that made the girl next to her flinch. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird seeking an exit. She marched toward the front, the stolen pregnancy test slick with sweat in her hand. She slammed the white plastic onto his desk. 2 blue lines stared up at him, stark and accusatory. "You forgot this in your bottom drawer," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking despite her efforts to remain steady. "It sat right next to the department payroll files, the ones you've been adjusting." Sterling didn't blink. He leaned forward, the mahogany groaning under his weight. A small twitch ignited at the corner of his mouth, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach his cold, gray eyes. "Blackmail requires leverage, Chloe," he murmured, his breath smelling of bitter espresso and mint. "You've brought a toy to a riot." Chloe leaned closer, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of his desk. "I brought a mirror. Open those doors, or I start screaming about what happens during your private office hours. I have my phone in my pocket, Professor. It's been recording since I walked in." Sterling's hand moved with the speed of a striking snake. He didn't go for the phone. Instead, he reached for the control panel on the side of his podium. With a flick of his wrist, a secondary set of steel shutters groaned down over the high, narrow windows, plunging the room into a dim, artificial twilight. The only light came from the glowing red, locked indicators and the flickering blue glow of the overhead projector. "Logic check, Chloe," Sterling said, his voice dropping into a melodic, terrifyingly calm register. "You assume the recording matters? You assume there is an audience left to hear it. But look around you. This isn't a classroom anymore. It's a closed system." In the third row, Emily Vance began to hum. It was a low, haunting melody, a funeral dirge that vibrated through the floorboards. Chloe recognized the sound. It was the signal that Emily's panic was reaching a breaking point. Emily stood up, her face ashen in the blue light. Her eyes were fixed on the red plastic handle of the fire alarm near the rear exit. "I can't be in here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "The air, it's too thick. I need to get out." She bolted. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as she scrambled up the tiered steps toward the alarm. "Emily, wait!" Chloe shouted, but it was too late. Sterling moved with a predatory grace that defied his age. He intercepted Emily before she was halfway up the aisle. He didn't just block her path. He lunged, grabbing her by the shoulders and shoving her back with a violent force. Emily's body hit a heavy oak desk with a sickening thud. The sound of wood hitting bone echoed through the hall, followed by the sharp gasp of 20 terrified students. Emily slumped to the floor, clutching her side, the funeral dirge replaced by a ragged, sobbing breath. "Sit down," Sterling commanded. The physical display of dominance hung in the air like the smell of ozone before a storm. He adjusted his tie again. Zip. Chloe felt a surge of cold calculation. She needed a win. She reached into her pocket, her fingers dancing over the screen of her phone by feel alone. She had spent 3 years working the campus IT help desk. She knew the quirks of the university's network better than anyone. She navigated to her cloud storage app, hitting the sync command. A small vibration against her thigh confirmed the upload had started. Every word he had said, the sound of the struggle, the metallic slide of the shutters. It was all moving to a server miles away. "It's done," Chloe said, her voice gaining strength. "The audio is in the cloud, Sterling. You can break the phone, but you can't break the data." A sense of relief washed over her. She had the armor now. She had the map. 1, 2, 3. She counted the steps in her head, mentally preparing the path to the door once he realized he was beaten. "Oh, Chloe," a voice chirped from the back of the room. It was Sarah Johnson, the dean's daughter. Sarah stood up, smoothing her pleated skirt, a forced, vacant smile plastered on her face. "You really shouldn't have done that, you know. It's so predictable." Sarah walked down the aisle, her heels clicking rhythmically. She didn't look at the injured Emily. She went straight to Sterling's side and handed him a small, sleek tablet. "She's been running the sink for 3 minutes, Professor," Sarah said, her voice dripping with a false, sugary sweetness. "I've been monitoring her signal from my laptop, you know. I redirected her upload to your private folder 10 seconds ago. Nothing went to the public cloud." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Chloe's feet. Paranoia, sharp and stinging, flooded the room. She looked at Sarah, the girl she had shared coffee with, the girl who had complained about Sterling's ego. Sarah hadn't been a friend. She had been a shadow, a spy for the man at the podium. "Validation is a powerful currency, isn't it, Sarah?" Sterling remarked, patting the girl's hand. He turned his gaze back to the class, his expression hardening. He tapped a command on his podium, and a massive digital clock appeared on the projector screen. Liu Shi-fen. The numbers were a bright, bleeding crimson. "The time for games has concluded," Sterling announced. "At noon, this system is programmed to send a mass email. Not just to this university, but to every internship coordinator, every medical board, and every parent on our contact list. It contains your full files. Every failed grade you thought was hidden, every psychiatric evaluation, every confidential clinic visit." A wave of whimpers broke out across the room. These were honor students, children of privilege and ambition. Their lives were built on the integrity of those records. "There is a thief among us," Sterling continued, his voice echoing. "Someone stole a sensitive item from my office. If the guilty party confesses before that clock hits 0, the leak is aborted. If not, you all go down together. Collective responsibility is a harsh teacher, but an effective one." Chloe stared at the clock. 59 minutes and 42 seconds. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She needed to get into the system. She needed to find the off switch. She moved toward the smart podium, her mind racing through lines of logic and bypasses. "Stay back, Chloe," Sterling warned. But she ignored him, lunging for the side panel of the podium where the maintenance ports usually lived. Her fingers searched for the familiar shape of a connection, but her heart sank. The panel was smooth, sealed. She realized with a jolt of horror that there were no wires leading out of the podium into the floor. It was a closed loop, an air-gapped system that didn't touch the school's main network. Her skills, her armor, were useless here. She was a master of the highway, but Sterling had moved the fight into a locked basement. "It's not connected to anything, is it?" she whispered. "I built this room specifically for this curriculum," Sterling said. He reached for a dial. "Let's see how well you think when the environment becomes less hospitable." The overhead lights began to flicker. It wasn't a random stutter. It was a rhythmic, pulsing code that made the shadows dance like frantic ghosts. A low mechanical groan vibrated through the walls as the temperature began to plummet. Chloe felt the hair on her arms stand up. The air, already thin, grew icy. "My father used to say that discomfort reveals the true self," Sterling mused, straightening his tie. Zip. "Who are you, Chloe, when you're freezing? Who are the rest of you when your futures are on the line?" Marcus Reed, the varsity linebacker who sat in the front row, had seen enough. He was a man of action, a fixer who believed any problem could be solved with enough force. He stood up, his broad shoulders blocking out the flickering light. "Enough of this crap," Marcus growled. He grabbed a heavy, steel-framed chair and hoisted it over his head. His knuckles popped, pop, 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 a rhythmic countdown to violence. "I'm breaking that door," he charged. He looked like a juggernaut, a force of nature aimed at the mahogany exit. But Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't even move from behind his lectern. He simply reached underneath the mahogany lip and pulled out a sleek, black device. A crackle of blue electricity split the air. The taser hit Marcus square in the chest. The big man's muscles locked instantly. He let out a strangled, wet groan as he collapsed, the chair clattering uselessly to the floor. Marcus hit the linoleum hard, his body twitching in the grip of the high-voltage current. The smell of scorched fabric and ionized air filled the room. "Physicality is a low-yield investment," Sterling said, tucking the taser back into its hidden holster. "Wouldn't you agree, Marcus?" Chloe backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test again, her last piece of physical leverage. She needed to see the name on it, to remind herself that she had the truth. But as she looked down, her blood ran cold. The blue lines were fading. The ink, once so sharp and definitive, was dissolving into the white plastic, turning into a faint, yellowish smear. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She rubbed the plastic, but it only made it worse. It was a chemical decoy, a vanishing ink trick. She had risked everything for a piece of trash that was literally erasing itself in her hand. "Logic check, Chloe." Sterling's voice was right behind her. She spun around. He was smiling now, a genuine, terrifying smile of triumph. "You thought I left my office door unlocked by accident? You thought I kept sensitive medical records in a bottom drawer? I knew you'd come for it. I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to feel that surge of heroic certainty. Because the fall is so much more educational when you think you're winning." Chloe felt the world tilt. Every move she had made, the theft, the recording, the confrontation, had been scripted by the man standing over her. She wasn't the player. She was the piece. "You're a liability, Chloe," Sarah Johnson whispered, leaning over the podium. "You've put all our records at risk for a fake piece of plastic, you know?" The mood in the room shifted. The other students, once paralyzed by fear of Sterling, were now turning their eyes toward Chloe and Emily. The cold was seeping into their bones, and the red clock was ticking down to 30 minutes. "It was Emily, wasn't it?" Sterling said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "She was the one who went for the alarm. She was the one who couldn't handle the pressure. She's the weak link in your chain." "It wasn't her," Chloe shouted, but the mob was already forming. A group of students, led by a frantic-looking pre-med major, surrounded Emily's desk. "Just tell him," the boy screamed. "Confess. I have a residency at Johns Hopkins on the line. I'm not losing that because of your protest." They began to shove her. Emily, still clutching her bruised side, began to hum the dirge louder, her eyes wide and glassy. She was disassociating, retreating into the music of her own grief. "Stop it!" Chloe lunged into the fray, pulling students away from Emily. "He's doing this on purpose. He's making us turn on each other." In the chaos, Chloe's eyes darted to the wall. Near the ceiling, the emergency intercom light was blinking. It was a faint, rhythmic pulse of green. Someone was on the other end. Someone was listening to the struggle. She didn't think. She scrambled onto a desk, her sneakers slipping on the polished wood. She leaped for the intercom button, her fingers inches from the metal plate. Sterling was there in a heartbeat. He didn't use the taser this time. He grabbed Chloe by the throat, his fingers like iron bands. He slammed her back against the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the darkened quad. The impact rattled her teeth. "You're persistent," Sterling hissed, his face inches from hers. "But you're fighting the wrong war." He pulled a tablet from his pocket and pressed it against the glass next to her head. "Look at it. Read the header." Chloe struggled for breath, her eyes focusing on the glowing screen. It was a formal memorandum, bearing the university's official gold seal. Subject: Authorization for pedagogical stress testing. The text below detailed a sanctioned radical teaching experiment designed to test student ethics under extreme duress. At the bottom was the signature of the university board and the dean himself. "They know, Chloe," Sterling whispered into her ear. "They approved it. Every bruise, every scream, every illegal lock. It's all a protected academic exercise. Your recordings are inadmissible. Your blackmail is just a lab report. You aren't a whistleblower. You're just a failing student who couldn't pass the final exam." The hope that had sustained Chloe, the belief that there was a system outside this room that would save her, shattered. She looked out the glass at the empty quad. The university wasn't her protector. It was the cage. 2 minutes, Sterling announced, releasing her. He walked back to the podium and reset the clock. 2 o'clock. "I have one more file to show you," Sterling said. He tapped the screen, and a video began to play on the massive overhead projector. It was grainy, taken from a high angle in a dimly lit office. It showed Chloe leaning over Sterling's desk, her hand on his shoulder, her face close to his. Through the distorted audio, she heard herself, or a version of herself, asking for favors in exchange for a grade. "Deep fake technology is a wonderful teaching tool," Sterling said. "If I press enter at 0, this video goes to the police along with the data leak. It will look like you tried to solicit me, and when I refused, you staged this hostage situation as revenge. Sign this non-disclosure agreement now, or your life ends in 120 seconds. He slid a digital tablet onto the desk. A line for a signature blinked expectantly. Chloe looked at the screen, then at the terrified faces of her classmates, then at the mocking smirk on Sarah Johnson's face. She felt the weight of her father's ruined reputation, the years of counting steps to avoid the dark. 31, 32. She wasn't counting steps anymore. She was counting nodes. She looked at the smart podium. It was air-gapped from the internet, yes. But Sterling was using a wireless tablet to control the projector, and the room's emergency lighting was controlled by a Bluetooth-enabled sensor. Logic check, Chloe whispered to herself. She didn't reach for the signature pen. She reached for her phone, which was still in her hand. She hadn't been trying to upload to the cloud for the last 5 minutes. She had been running a local search for every Bluetooth signal in the room. Sterling's tablet was the master. But the university's emergency broadcast system, the one that sent alerts to the massive jumbotrons in the quad and the local police precinct, was designed to override every local signal in the event of a disaster. It was a blind protocol. It didn't ask for permission. It just took the feed. Chloe's fingers moved with a blur of speed she had practiced for a decade. She didn't try to hack Sterling's tablet. She used her phone to spoof the tablet's ID, making the emergency system think she was the authorized administrator. "What are you doing?" Sterling demanded, stepping toward her. "Sign it." "I'm not signing," Chloe said. She hit the execute command. "I'm broadcasting." Suddenly, the grainy video of the solicitation vanished. In its place, the projector, and every screen on campus, flashed to a live feed of the room. It showed Marcus twitching on the floor. It showed the bruise on Emily's side. It showed Sterling's hand around Chloe's throat from 60 seconds ago, and it showed the forged memo. "The jumbotrons are live, Professor," Chloe said, her voice echoing through the room and, she knew, across the entire valley. "And since the precinct is on the same emergency loop, I'd imagine the police are watching the radical experiment right now." The silence that followed was absolute. Sterling's face went from triumph to a pale, sickly gray. He lunged for the podium, his fingers frantic, but the system was locked. Chloe had bricked the controls, flooding the channel with a loop of his own violence. A distant wail of sirens began to rise from the valley, cutting through the heavy Pennsylvania air. The mahogany doors didn't click this time. They exploded. The SWAT team moved like a black tide, the light from their tactical flashlights cutting through the artificial twilight. "Hands! Show me your hands!" Sterling didn't fight. He didn't even move. He stood behind his anchor of a podium, his silk tie slightly askew, looking like a man who had finally realized the market had crashed and he was holding nothing but junk bonds. As the officers tackled him to the floor, the ethics of power died in a chorus of shouted commands and the heavy clatter of boots. Chloe stood in the center of the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold was still there, but it didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like a clearing. She saw Sarah Johnson huddled in the corner, sobbing into her hands. Chloe walked over to her. She didn't offer a hand. She simply held up her phone, showing a secondary recording, one of Sarah admitting to the redirect and the spying. "You should have looked for a better investment, Sarah," Chloe said quietly. She handed the phone to a waiting officer. "You know?" Chloe walked out of the hall, past the shattered mahogany and the glowing red lights that had finally turned a peaceful, steady green. The Pennsylvania sun was blinding. It hit the rusted industrial skeletons of the town, making them shine like silver. Chloe stood on the top step of the lecture hall, looking down at the quad. Students were gathered around the jumbotrons, their faces turned upward in shock. She knew her scholarship was gone. She knew the university would try to bury the scandal and her academic career was likely over before it began. But as she took her first step down the stairs, she didn't count. 1. She didn't need the number to know where she was going. 2. The darkness was gone. 3. Chloe Miller breathed in the heavy, damp air of the valley, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like the truth.